I'm really grateful that so many of you have joined us this day for the celebration of Easter, the celebration of resurrection. Before I get to the heart of my message or lesson this morning, I want to provide you with a few metaphysical definitions that will be helpful as we begin to study the women of Easter and how important they really were. All the definitions come from Ernest Holmes, as well as the Revealing Word and the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary by Charles Fillmore. First is the word crucifixion. This means the crossing out in consciousness of errors that have become fixed in our state of mind. It's the surrender of the whole personality so that the Christ mind that Dr. Ernest Holmes speaks of may be expressed in total fullness. The second word is resurrection. This is the restoring of the mind and body by realizing that God indeed is spirit. Resurrection takes place in us every time we rise to the realization of the indwelling life that connects us all to the divine. The final definitions that I'm choosing to give you are actually names. There were numerous women by the name of Mary, 5 to be exact, that were present at the crucifixion as well as the tomb 3 days later. Metaphysically, Mary means feminine, affectionate, emotional side of man's being. Mary, the mother of Jesus, also signifies divine motherhood of love and is said to be intuition. The other prominent woman was Mary Magdalene. She represents gratitude, love, service, faithful attachment. This morning's lesson is about the women who followed, supported, loved, and stayed with Jesus to the very end. It's no wonder that we don't hear much about the women who stayed while the men ran away. The Gospels were all written by men, and centuries of patriarchal church authority resulted in the diminishment and even the slander of some of the women who followed Jesus. According to Matthew, Mark, and John, there were a total of 7 women who stayed till the bitter end of the crucifixion. They included Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of the disciples, James and Joseph, the mother of the sons of Zebedee, Mary, the mother of Jesus, a sister of the Mother Mary, Salome, and the Mary of Clopas. It's a lot of Marys. Kind of lets you know what popular names do. 7 is a significant number throughout the Bible. 7 is the number of the divine intervention of people of biblical times could only see 7 planets with their naked eye, as well as it represents the 7 chakras in the human body. In Genesis, it states on the 7th day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the 7th day from all the work which he had made. In the book of Numbers in the Old Testament, there's a reference to 7 altars, 7 steer, and 7 rams. And in Matthew 18, it states that Peter came to Jesus and said to him, "If my brother is at fault with me, how many times should I forgive him? Up to 7 times?" And Jesus said to him, "I do not say to you up to 7 times, but rather 7 times 70. The number 7 is being associated with divine intervention, comes from 2 basic numbers, 3, which represents the Holy Trinity, plus 4, which is the fourfold nature of man: spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. Remember, these are the 4 layers of the creative process that Ernest Holmes taught us. We receive a concept or an idea from the indwelling Christ consciousness at that spiritual level, the highest level. We become spiritually illuminated at the mental level. We experience our feelings and are inspired to take action at the emotional level. And we experience our outcome in the world on the physical level. So 7 is God and man together, the intervention of God, the Trinity, into the affairs of man, into his fourfold nature. Returning to the women, and the explanations for some of the women, the 7 women, are not very complimentary. Have you heard that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, or at least a promiscuous woman? That's not really actually in the Bible. She was tagged with that reputation by a pope in the 6th century who didn't read the Bible very well. Unfortunately, the image of Mary Magdalene as a woman has persisted even to current times. What the Bible does say about her, however, is that in Luke, we're told that Jesus healed Mary Magdalene of the 7 demons. There's that number 7 again. She followed Jesus for the years of his ministry. Remember the metaphysical definition earlier? She followed him out of gratitude, faith, and love. Another Mary I mentioned was the mother of the apostles, James and John, and she's best known for actually pestering Jesus, wanting Jesus to make her 2 sons, second in command of this new ministry. There's then another Mary in Matthew's account who is Jesus's mother. Also, we've got the 2 other Marys we don't know much about, as well as Salome. So consider these Marys who stayed, as well as the 2 others. A demon-possessed woman, a pushy mom, and another mother who was unwed when she became pregnant, and that was a stonable offense. As far as we know, 3 of these women who would have been rejected by good, decent people of Israel, of Palestine. Yet the fact that they were women would have marginalized them anyway. In the 1st century, women in Palestine were definitely placed within the home. They were expected to stay there, to keep the house clean, prepare the meals, take care of the children, and they left the control of their father and moved to being controlled by their husbands. Their role was well defined and narrow. And they had to stay in the house. According to some rabbis, they were not even supposed to leave it unless they came to synagogue on Saturdays, Friday night and Saturdays. Even then, when they got there, they were expected to stay at another, or sit rather, in a whole separate area away from the men. And they were never, ever allowed to study the scriptures, only the men. Men could not even greet women back in biblical times, but Jesus did. He spoke openly to women like he did to the woman at the well. Jesus made women a part of his ministry. He honored, respected, and treated them as equals. Mary Magdalene is listed in Luke along with other women who left their home to follow Jesus. These were all independent women who Luke tells us helped to fund Jesus's ministry. Now remember, this was a time when wives and women had their money controlled by their husbands or their fathers. And yet there were these 7 women who hung in there to watch a horrific death, while only John stayed. It was an extremely painful death, the crucifixion of an innocent man. Remember what I said earlier? Crucifixion is the death of the whole personality so that the Christ mind may be expressed to its fullest. And just what does the Christ mind mean? Holmes tells us in our Science of Mind text, the mind which was in Jesus Christ means the mind of God, the divine mind of the Creator. It is also about one's ability to change by the crossing out of past beliefs and that which no longer serves us. On Good Friday and Easter, earthquakes proclaimed the crossing out of the past. And then when Jesus dies on the cross, the ground shakes so hard that tombs are open. The curtains in Jerusalem temple are torn. The sky becomes like night, and yet it is not even sundown yet. It was before the beginning of the Jewish Sabbath. Now, if you've ever been in a major earthquake, you know how scary that can be. And yet the 7 women stayed to the very bitter end. They stayed through the earthquake and the darkness. They stayed to watch his body being taken down from the cross. They stayed as he was taken to the tomb where he would be buried. They stayed while the faint of heart left out of fear. And then comes Easter morning, a day of resurrection. Depending on which book of the New Testament you read, either 3 women went together to the tomb on Easter morning, or Mary Magdalene went alone. I like the story in John the best. And so we read in chapter 20 of John that early Sunday morning, Mary gets up. She's anxious. She can't wait. And so she goes alone with her spices and her ointments to where Jesus was buried. And Mary is keen. She's impatient and ever so desperate to get to the body of Jesus, to prepare it so that it will be let go. And when she arrives, much to her dismay, the huge stone had been rolled away. Thinking that the body had been stolen, Mary went back to tell Peter and John and asked them to come back with her and help her to look. All 3 returned to the tomb. They were confused and flustered. Where was Jesus? Who had removed his body? The mystified disciples go back to that upper room. To heck with it all. Mary, however, was so distraught that she stayed in the tomb and sobbed uncontrollably. And suddenly 2 angels appeared and spoke to her. They asked her what was the matter, and she answered them and then turned away. Now, most of us, having 2 angels visit us, we would have been floored. We would have been amazed, but not Mary. Because for 2 years she had followed Jesus. She had supported him. She was devoted to his life. And now, heartbroken and weeping, she's bewildered because she can't find him. Who had taken him? She turns away and sees a figure and assumes that it's a gardener here where the tomb is. Despite what Jesus had taught, like the disciples, she had not yet quite grasped that Jesus would die and then raise from the dead in 3 days. Even when the risen Christ first spoke to her, she did not recognize his name, or recognize him, or recognize his voice. Notice, however, that when Jesus calls her name, when he states it and says, Mary, just one thing, Mary, one thing changed. Jesus had said many times, my sheep know my voice when I call them by name. And it was certainly true of Mary. Jesus called Mary by name, and she immediately reached out. She recognized him. She went to hold him, to touch him. She wanted to hug him. Don't touch me, don't hold me, he said. And by this simple statement, by this simple act, we know Jesus has been resurrected. Dr. Holmes tells us in the Science of Mind text, resurrection is the rising from a belief in death. Jesus made it plain that we should do even greater things. He taught us that the kingdom of heaven is not reached through the gateway of death, but by overcoming our limited beliefs while here, by recognizing the Father within. Resurrection is the releasing of the error beliefs of duality, because we know that we are one with Spirit. There is no separation from God or us. Mary stayed and had an incredible experience that morning. And then Jesus tells her to go tell the disciples that he is risen. Just imagine Mary's joy, and yet it's mixed up with a little bit of confusion. Mary had been challenged to tell other people about what she witnessed. This was not a simple and easy request. You see, she had to make a choice. She could either tell others what she had seen and experienced or ignore the request. By responding to the challenge of telling others, it could be seen that she is being obedient. However, it's not as all as it seems. If the Roman and Jewish authorities heard that Jesus' body had gone, that he had been raised to eternal life, then authorities would have wanted to respond with silencing and refuting the news. Mary's life was in danger. However, this was not the only challenge that she faced. The second challenge was to make the disciples believe that what she had witnessed this very first Easter morning. Can you imagine the unbelief people probably felt hearing the news that Jesus was still here? After all, once a person's dead and put in a tomb, they remain dead. This is unless, of course, robbers have plundered the tomb and removed the body. If you were one of the disciples that was told Jesus is alive, then you probably thought that Mary either went to the wrong tomb or someone had stolen the body of Jesus. Both these situations would have been the more palatable explanation, and yet both were totally incorrect. We know that Mary was successful in making people believe Jesus had been risen from the dead. And if she hadn't been successful, we wouldn't ever have celebrated Easter on this day. So what can we do to learn from these events of the crucifixion and the resurrection? I want to look at two separate points or two separate concepts to understand and to learn. The first is how we respond to events that we witness. When Mary went to the tomb that first Easter morning, and she witnessed an event that absolutely changed history. She responded to the challenge and joy of witnessing the resurrection of Jesus. In our lives, we are witnesses to many events, either in person or through the media. The majority of events that we witness are not world-changing. Most of us, however, can remember exactly where we were and what we were doing when 9/11 happened. Or those of us old enough can remember the day Kennedy was shot. We are currently experiencing a world pandemic. There hasn't been one for over 100 years. We can't avoid it. It's on the news every day from morning until night. It is a life-changing event, and we will never return to how life was. Just like 9/11 created TSA and all of the precautions that are necessary to keep us on our travel safe, coronavirus will change our lives forever. We may never, ever shake hands again, for example. We in Butte County live in a rural area, so we have very few cases here so far. But a mere 160 miles away in San Francisco, there are close to 1,000 cases. Some of us are healthy and have no fear of the disease. One of my affirmations is, coronavirus has no power over me. And while others, because of health challenges, they may be living in fear. Additionally, besides the fear, we may feel isolated. We're staying home 24/7. Others are dealing with the loss of their job and the struggling with financial challenges. We view our major events based on our own personal beliefs and fears, or we can respond to the challenge of this virus with love and compassion and a willingness to help and serve others. Never ever forget our oneness with each other and with the divine. Mary responded with her challenges with love. Like Mary, what can you do today, even though you're staying at home, that responds to this disease with love? Maybe it's a phone call to someone. If you're able to run an errand, maybe you can get groceries for someone unable to leave their home. Maybe you offer treatment for those who are ill. What might you do to meet this challenge and this disease with love? What you can do is to help another rise up each morning in their daily resurrection. The second point to consider is what was Mary's interaction with the divine. She went to the tomb, and her interaction with God through the angels that visited her was a little unique. This, however, is not our normal way of reacting with God or interacting with God. For the majority of us, we don't see angels. However, every moment of our lives, we have the opportunity to seize God's presence in our surroundings, to hear her through our intuition, or to experience acts of kindness and oneness. One of the initial Aramaic titles given to Jesus was Ihai Daya. It means the enlightened one. As we celebrate this day of resurrection, let us not forget the story of the women who are so seldom mentioned and are often forgotten. They came, they followed, and gave us so much that is unrecognized and unwritten, and they stayed. The women came to teach us love, devotion, oneness, faith. Their devotion reminds us that the resurrection takes place in us every time we rise to the realization of the indwelling life that connects us to the one with the divine. Indeed, we are one with the divine and one with each other. They came to let us know that we too can be enlightened ones. This is the truth in my life. This is the truth in yours. And so it is. Amen.